Hello again, Steve here with a few comments on self-help versus socialism. I'm pretty sure I've done something about this before, a few comments on it, but it came to me this morning as something I want to talk about again. Now, whenever I search anything socialism versus, what comes up is either communism or capitalism. And I don't think there's much of a versus between communism and socialism really when you really get into it. It's collectivism at the end of the day. And versus capitalism, yeah, okay, as some sort of a political or a grand organizational sense, there is a versus there for sure. But I think when we really come down to it in terms of what it means to us, the distinction is not so much anything else versus socialism. It's individualism, right? Which for us, and of course, whenever these things are talked about, it's talked about in terms of how we want to progress, right? Because this is so much what we want in life. We want to somehow progress to improve the quality of our life experience. I mean, that's how we run along in time. We don't want to end up in the gutter at the end of the day. You know, we want to at least, feel fulfilled or get something done. So the verses, I think, that really matters here in that sense is the self-help versus, or the self-knowledge versus socialism. And I think that the self-help goes into so many areas. Like I would say that real spirituality is self-help. There is whatever we're going to educate ourselves in. If we're going to get more information in our profession, in a way, what we're learning there is self-help. Because it's kind of like there's knowing ourselves and there's also adding to our person, right? There's like, we're born into this world as a slate of genetics and whatever. We end up with what we have, our skin color and what height we're going to be and our, base intelligence and all that sort of stuff. And then, of course, what gets added onto us in terms of the programming by our families and the abuse we might have gotten or whatever. But at a certain point, we get to make those decisions as to what we're going to layer on. And that's where the self-help comes in, and the distinction between just glomming onto some collective and actually taking control of our lives. And that's why I would say there's a distinction between organized religion and spirituality, as an example. Or organized anything, or organized university education, where you have to learn a bunch of this pseudoscience or this social justice or whatever it is as a form of, or as a part and parcel, part of the package, right? The package deal. Whereas one can just go and start reading books and go on the internet and whatever and decide for oneself. That is more directed towards self-help, because it's not just accepting somebody else's opinion, somebody else's package. Like going into somebody's organized church, sure, one could gain spiritual gain there, for sure, self-help there. It depends on how you look at it and what you take. If it's just taking the narratives as they are, well then that's not really self-help. For example, I had some people come by, the evangelists come by the house the other day, and I don't chase these people away. I like to have a little bit of a conversation with them, much to the chagrin of other members of my family, for sure. And they were, I'd never seen these people before, Church of God. I don't know. I asked them, what other kind of church is there? Like that's what they were called. And they wanted to talk to me about how the Bible was true, right? And it was so unbelievably scripted. And even their Bible, their unique Bible, all the references that they were pulling out, the Bible was actually printed with little red paragraphs, that the ones that they were supposed to reference, and I pointed that out. Like, why just reading the red? Why not read the white? Well, because that sort of stuff we don't know how to interpret it or whatever, right? But it's all just scripted, and somebody went in and said, okay, you guys read the red, and that's what they stick with. And so I think that most people are socialist minded in a lot of ways, to the point where, like, I was talking to this, I had two really good conversations this last week with people I know to a fairly good extent, And one of these, one of them was a young guy, and he was saying that he can't really talk to anybody. There's hardly anybody in the world that he can talk to because they're not interested in what he's interested in, and they think he's kind of crazy for what he's interested in. Because what he is he's a bit of a thinker. He's a deep thinker. He doesn't just accept the scripts that people give him. So he's a hard time talking to people. And there was somebody else that I was talking to who likes a deep conversation. And some of the things that we were talking about was like that conversation never occurred before with anybody else. It's really weird. And this in the conversation with this young guy, the acknowledgement was it's very refreshing to meet somebody who's into self-help, who's into betterment, because most people are just within that Overton window, right? In their conversation, what's acceptable. And they get really nervous, especially if they're around other people, to talk about anything else. And that's not conducive to self-help. That is conducive to sticking with the social tribe. Because there's the put-downs. This is the thing. People who are not into self-help, who are more socialist-minded, will be a bit, will kind of bully people who are into self-help. They'll be a bit mocking towards people who are into self-help. And, well, it's, after a while, we get used to it. We get used to sort of, okay, we can sense. It's almost like how gay people can sense another gay person in the room, right? It's just very quickly, there's a sense. We can get to the point of people who are into self-help, of just sensing people who are into self-help. First of all, they're usually a lot more positive, you know, and they're just generally, we can get along with them better, those of us who are into it. And so the question, I guess, is, you know, if we want a better world, which people who are into self-help do, of course, right? Because there's people who are into self-help also see the connection between the rest and self, but it's just the approach that they're taking. The approach that socialists take is that in order for me to have a better world, the world has got to get fixed. And it's usually got to get fixed by a whole shit ton of bodies being splayed out over the course of time, you know, in the extreme sense. The self-help minded person says that, look, I'm going to focus on what I have greatest control over, first at least. And what I have greatest control over is my own decision-making process or whatever. So it's a very inward approach, the self-help, versus the outward approach of, say, you know, socialist agitation or whatever. But at the same time, the similarity that lies between the socialist, I think, and the self-help minded person is that they both want a better world. So, you know, when we're approaching people and we realize that most people are socialist minded, they are, in a way, in one way. The other way that they're not really is that they have self-interest, and that human beings in general, we have self-interest. So if we can appeal to that self-interest and make the case that a more effective and efficient way towards self-interest is self-help. Because, and you see this with the growing new right, you might say, the new conservative. I don't mean neocon conservative by any means, but the new sort of new counterculture, you might say, which is the new young conservative. And you see it even in the, you know, the socialist plantations, like how the liberals like to appeal to those who are considered to be disenfranchised, like the blacks and all the minorities and so on. This victim mentality. But you see people who are breaking out of that and who are saying, hang on a second here. You know, I think of people like Candace Owen, whether, I'm not sure if she's legit or not, but anyways, Jesse Lee Peterson and others, who are saying, hang on a second here. Why this victim mentality? What's it done for you? I mean, you've been on this socialist train for 50 years, and things have gotten continually worse, right? Because But why don't you, what do you got to lose? Like, you're on a trajectory of getting worse, 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 worse. How about try self-help? How about try inner reflection? Of course, they come from different perspectives. Of course, Peterson, he's coming from this religious perspective. But once again, if true spirituality can be gleaned from that by one's experience, then there can be true self-help. And one would say, oh, it's not self, it's actually God. Well, but who's making the decision in the moment to follow the God or whatever the God's morals are? I mean, at the end of the day, for ourselves, if we forget about the gods for a moment, we have to make a decision at a certain point what perspective we're going to have. Are we going to have the socialist perspective, or are we going to have the self-help perspective? And yeah, so I believe that most people believe that, what was the term I used? That self-interest is served by socialism, at least in some degree. I mean, even the minarchist believes in some form of socialism, right? They have to. Anybody who believes in government, a collective use of force upon people who don't want to comply, they believe in a form of socialism. I mean like a totalitarian socialism. Socialism that is completely voluntary, like you go into, somebody who joins a cloister convent. Well, that's voluntary, and they give up everything to the collective within that. Well, that's a voluntary socialism. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the dictatorial socialism, that somebody who doesn't want to be in it is damn well going to be in it, because we're going to make sure that he's in it. That's what I'm talking about. But where has that worked, right? And where does the satisfaction at the end of the day come from? Where does real satisfaction come from that is greater, let's say, anyways, that's the question, that is greater than the fulfillment of one making a decision and actually having achievement on it? That comes out of self-help, in realizing, okay, there's an element of myself that can make a decision. Sure. And the socialist, of course, will play on the other side, will play on everything that you were born a certain way, you're born a certain color, you're only a certain height, you're a certain gender, you're certain this, certain that. And that's all true. But what's harder to change? Your skin color or your decisions, right? Your race or gender or your decisions? I don't know. I'm of the mind that a lot of these things we just can't change. We're pretending. And it's just ridiculous. Let's leave the uncontrollables, essentially, as they are. Use them as our base ingredient for what we've got and be grateful for what we have. And then from there, make decisions that are constructive, that can help our self-interest, and that will help our social network as well. Because when we're doing better, those around us get to see a good example. We're always examples anyways. Why not be a positive and constructive example? That's my approach anyways. That's my question. So I would say, yeah, an important distinction to make, I think even more than socialism versus capitalism or socialism versus communism, is socialism versus self-help or self-knowledge. Because so long as we stay in this collective mindset, which is going to always lead to victim mentality in some segments, we're losing out on the potential to look inward and what we can do with ourselves and better ourselves, to make ourselves more constructive, productive individuals. Hope this is helpful. Steve here again, great chatting. Talk again soon. Please like, subscribe, and share, and comment below. All the best.